The envelope felt thin and insignificant in my hands, a stark, flimsy contrast to the heavy, cream-colored stock my cousins were clutching, while they celebrated their millions from my grandmother's will. I stood there holding what looked like a forgotten thank you note. The pitying looks from my relatives were a physical weight. 6 months later, those same relatives were scrambling, their golden towers crumbling to dust, while I was finally uncovering the woman I was always meant to be. My name is Beatrice, but my grandmother always called me Bea. And this is the story of how the most humiliating day of my life became the beginning of my real one. To understand the game my grandmother, Eleanor, played from beyond the grave, you need to meet the players. There was Charlotte, my perfect older cousin, already adjusting the imaginary crown on her head, her posture screaming CEO of the family's interior design empire. Vintage Rose, her brother Julian, was practically vibrating with the effort of containing his glee, no doubt calculating the square footage of his new penthouse. Their mother, my Aunt Diana, stood beside them, a sleek panther who had finally cornered her prey. And then there was me, Beatrice, the 64-year-old librarian who had driven her 12-year-old Toyota Corolla, with its persistent check engine light, to the reading of a will for a woman who redefined the word matriarch. Eleanor didn't build a company, she built an aesthetic. She turned a keen eye for mid-century modern furniture into Vintage Rose, a brand synonymous with effortless, curated living. My cousins devoured that image. They wanted the glossy magazine spreads, the designer labels, the public adoration. Me, I just wanted another afternoon in her sun-drenched conservatory, sipping Earl Grey and listening to her stories about the pieces everyone else saw only as objects. She saw the history in the wood, the soul in the design. That day in the lawyer's office wasn't about saying goodbye to Eleanor. It was the day I learned that the most valuable treasures are often wrapped in the plainest paper, and that the people who pity you are often standing on a foundation of sand. My alarm buzzes at 5:45 a.m. every morning, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. I've been the head librarian at the Cedar Creek Public Library for 22 years. The view from my small bungalow's kitchen window is of a magnolia tree I planted a decade ago, not a city skyline. Mrs. Gable's tabby cat is always on my fence at 6:10, and I can hear the Henderson kids waiting for the school bus. This is my life, quiet, ordered, filled with the smell of old paper and the quiet rustle of turning pages, a world away from the one I was born into. Being a Vintage Rose heir meant something in certain circles. It meant gallery openings, charity luncheons, and knowing the difference between a Herman Miller and a Knoll piece just by the curve of the wood. For me, it meant choosing between fixing the leak in my roof and replacing my worn-out tires because I'd walked away from the family business to run a library. My late husband, Arthur, understood that choice. He was a high school English teacher who found more poetry in a student's aha moment than in any sonnet. Ours was a love built of quiet understanding and shared silences, a deep, peaceful river. We had tried for children, but it was not in the cards for us. A quiet sorrow we learned to carry together. He died 5 years ago, a quiet passing in his sleep, and the world became a little less bright, and a great deal more silent. Don't let them sand you down to fit their veneer, he'd told me once, watching me fret before a family dinner. You're a solid oak, my love. They're all pressed board with a pretty laminate. My mother, Grace, was Eleanor's only other kindred spirit. She'd been a ceramic artist, her hands always smudged with clay, her soul too wild for the polished world of Vintage Rose. She died when I was 30, and a part of my father, who had always been more of a business partner than a husband to her, seemed to die with her. He retreated fully into the company, leaving me to navigate the sharks alone. Eleanor was an enigma. She could command a boardroom with a single raised eyebrow. Yet I once saw her spend an entire hour watching a spider build its web outside her window. Look at the engineering bee, she'd whispered. No blueprint, just pure, instinctual creation. That's true beauty. Our Sunday afternoons were our sanctuary. While Charlotte and Julian were being groomed for corporate warfare, I'm with Eleanor in the conservatory. We weren't playing chess. We were restoring furniture. She taught me how to French polish, how to identify dovetail joints, how to listen to the story a piece of wood wants to tell. They see the finish. Beatrice, she said once, her hand resting on a battered Art Deco desk we were bringing back to life. Charlotte sees a price tag. Julian sees a status symbol. You see the tree it came from. You see the craftsman's hands. That's the difference between value and worth. I didn't understand it then, not fully, but I held on to those words. The law firm of Henderson and Gray was all cold, modern glass and steel, the absolute antithesis of Eleanor's warm, cluttered home. We were seated around a conference table so polished I could see the avarice in my cousin's eyes reflected back at them. We'd just come from the funeral, where Diana had complained that the lilies were too funereal. The irony was lost on her. Mr. Henderson, a man with the demeanor of a startled tortoise, adjusted his glasses. Before we begin, I want to state that Eleanor was exceptionally precise in her final wishes. She reviewed this document 1 week before her passing. Diana leaned forward, a predator scenting blood. We understand, Robert. Mother and I had extensive discussions about the future of Vintage Rose. It was a bald-faced lie. Eleanor discussed business with no one on Sundays. That was our time. Let's proceed, then, Henderson said, opening a file. To my granddaughter, Charlotte Vance, and her husband. I leave the primary ownership of Vintage Rose Designs, Inc., and the corporate holdings in account number 8472 to 901. Charlotte's sharp intake of breath was a victory hiss. I won't let you down, grandmother, she said to the air, her fingers already typing a triumphant text message. To my grandson, Julian Vance, Henderson continued, I leave the penthouse residence at 1200 Park Avenue and the vintage car collection, including the 1965 Ford Mustang. Julian actually pumped his fist. Yes, the Mustang. Do you know what that's worth? Mr. Henderson's eyes then found mine, and in them, I saw not pity, but something else, anticipation. And to my granddaughter, Beatrice Lowell, I leave this. He slid a simple, letter-sized envelope across the table. It was blank except for my name, written in Eleanor's elegant, looping cursive. The silence was broken by Julian's snort. You're kidding. An envelope. What's in it? A coupon for a free coffee. My hands were steady as I picked it up. The paper was light, almost fragile. I opened the flap and pulled out a single, one-way plane ticket. Venice, Italy. Departing in 72 hours. Let me see that. Charlotte plucked it from my fingers before I could react. An economy class ticket to Venice. Well, I suppose everyone deserves a vacation, especially at your age. B. A final little hurrah. Diana smiled a thin, condescending stretch of her lips. Eleanor always said you lacked the ambition for the business world, Beatrice. This is her way of giving you a lovely send-off. Venice is beautiful in the fall. How very thoughtful of her, my aunt added, not even trying to mask her disdain. I took the ticket back, my fingers tracing the destination. Venice. Why Venice? Eleanor had never mentioned it. She'd loved Paris, obsessed over Barcelona, but Venice, never. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping softly against the floor. Well, I said, my voice calmer than I felt, I suppose I should go pack. You're actually going. Julian looked genuinely baffled. You're going to use your vacation days to fly to Italy because of a random ticket. My grandmother left it for me, I said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. The least I can do is use it. My father, who had been silent, finally spoke. Sentimental nonsense, just like your mother. Grace never understood that business requires a certain hardness. That was the moment I knew I was absolutely getting on that plane. He was wrong about my mother, wrong about me, and I was beginning to suspect, terribly wrong about what Eleanor had truly left me as I walked out of that sterile room, their derisive laughter echoing in the hallway. I heard Eleanor's voice from our last Sunday together. B. The most beautiful patina isn't applied, it's earned through time and touch. Everyone wants the shiny new thing. Very few understand the beauty of a well-loved surface. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't grief or humiliation. It was curiosity. That night, in my quiet bungalow, I stared at the ticket on my kitchen table. My bank account balance glowed on my laptop screen. $3,421.18. My property taxes were due in 3 weeks. The check engine light was a persistent, worrying amber. I had a library board meeting scheduled that I would have to miss. Every logical, sensible, 64-year-old cell in my body was screaming that this was insanity. But I kept thinking of Eleanor. Just 2 weeks before she died, we'd been working on a delicate Chippendale chair. Her hands, usually so steady, had trembled slightly. Beatrice, she'd said, her voice soft, what do you know about restoration? It's about preserving the original intent of the piece, I'd answered, reciting the lesson she'd taught me decades ago. No, my dear girl, she'd replied, looking at me with an intensity that felt new. True restoration is about revealing the soul that's always been there, hidden under layers of grime and bad varnish. It's about having the courage to strip everything away until you find the truth. Your mother knew that. She never let them varnish over her spirit. She'd paused, running a hand over the chair's leg. When the time comes, you'll have the courage to strip it all back, even when they all think you're a fool for doing it. Holding that ticket, her words weren't a memory. They were a command. I called my best friend, Sarah, the only other librarian who understood my world. I'm going, I said the moment she answered. To Italy. With the ticket. I knew you would, she replied without a hint of surprise. It's the most unbeal-like thing you've ever done. I'm proud of you. Sarah, this is insane. I'm a librarian. I don't do spontaneous transatlantic trips. Maybe it's time you started, she said gently. Maybe Eleanor knew that better than anyone. The next morning, I arranged for a substitute librarian. My deputy, a wonderfully capable young woman named Chloe, was thrilled at the prospect of being in charge for a week. Don't worry, B, she said. We'll keep the pages turning. You go have an adventure. An adventure. At my age, the Uber to the airport cost $47.50. I packed a single carry-on with 2 sensible pairs of trousers, 3 blouses, and my most comfortable walking shoes. At the gate, I pulled out the envelope again. That's when I noticed it. Tucked into the fold, almost invisible, was a small, faded black and white photograph. It showed a young, vibrant Eleanor, maybe in her 20s, laughing on a gondola, a handsome dark-haired Italian man smiling at her On the back, in faint pencil, was written, Venezia 1959. My boarding group was called. I found my seat to 7B, a middle seat, of course, between a teenager with loud music leaking from his headphones and a woman who was already organizing her array of sanitizing wipes. As the plane lifted off, the familiar grid of my city shrinking below, I thought of Charlotte, probably already sitting in Eleanor's old office. Julian was no doubt revving the engine of that Mustang, and here I was, crammed into coach, flying toward a mystery. But for the first time since Arthur died, I felt a spark, a tiny, fragile flame of anticipation. The flight was long and uncomfortable, but when the pilot announced we were beginning our descent into Marco Polo Airport, and I saw the Venetian lagoon sparkling below, a mosaic of blues and greens, my breath caught in my throat. It was nothing like my magnolia tree. Immigration was a breeze. Turismo, the officer asked. Sid, I said, and for the first time, it felt true. The arrivals hall was a cacophony of languages and excitement. I was gathering my wits, wondering where to even begin, when I saw him. An older man, perhaps in his 70s, with kind eyes and a weathered face, holding a sign that read simply, Beatrice Lowell. My heart hammered against my ribs. I approached cautiously. I'm Beatrice. His face broke into a warm, crinkly-eyed smile. Signora Lowell. Finalmente, welcome. I am Giovanni. Please, come. The boat is waiting. His English was accented. Musical boat. Who sent you? La Signora Eleanor. She arranged everything many months ago. She was my very dear friend for many years. He took my bag and led me out of the terminal, not to the car park, but to the water taxi dock. The smell of salt and diesel and damp stone hit me, uniquely Venetian. He helped me onto a beautiful, polished wooden boat taxi a quay, and we sped away from the modern world, into the heart of the ancient city. We glided past palazzos with peeling, water-stained facades that held more history than any building back home. Giovanni pointed out landmarks, but I was barely listening, lost in the sheer impossibility of it all. Finally, we turned into a quieter canal and pulled up to a small, private dock. The building it belonged to was a 3-story, ochre-colored structure, its green shutters thrown open to the morning sun. This is it, Giovanni said, tying up the boat with practiced ease. Palazzo dei Su, the Palace of Sighs. She owned this, I whispered, staring up at the elegant, if slightly faded, facade. For 50 years, since 1974, he led me through a heavy wooden door and into a courtyard filled with the scent of jasmine. An elderly woman emerged from a doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. She had a beautiful, lined face and thick white hair piled in a loose bun. Her eyes, a piercing blue, steadied me, and they filled with instant, unmistakable tears. Beatrice, she breathed, her hands reaching for mine. You have her eyes. You have my Giorgio's eyes. The world tilted. I gripped Giovanni's arm for support. Beatrice, Giovanni said softly, his hand on my shoulder. "This is Isabella Rossi, your grandmother's, your nonna." "That's impossible," I stammered, my mind reeling. "My grandmother was Eleanor Whitmore." "Eleanor was my friend," Isabella said, her voice strong and clear. "My dearest friend in the world. But Giorgio was my brother. He was your grandfather." She led me, my legs unsteady, into a spacious kitchen overlooking the canal. The room was warm, filled with copper pots and the smell of fresh coffee. She poured us both a small cup of strong espresso. "In 1958, your grandmother, Eleanor, came to Venice. She was running from the life her family had planned for her. She met my brother Giorgio, a woodcarver. It was a lightning strike." She smiled, a distant, beautiful smile. "They were married here, in a small church near the Rio. It was a secret. Her family would never have approved. She became pregnant. My father," I whispered, "said Roberto. But then, Eleanor's father fell ill. She had to return to America for what was meant to be a few weeks. She discovered she was pregnant. Her family, they pressured her. They arranged a marriage to your American grandfather, a good business match. She was trapped. She wrote to Giorgio, explaining. It broke his heart, but he understood. He loved her enough to let her go." She pulled out a wooden box, intricately carved. Inside were stacks of letters, all in Eleanor's handwriting, tied with ribbons, dozens of photographs, Eleanor, Giorgio, and a little boy, my father with Giorgio's dark, laughing eyes. She never forgot him, never forgot us. She bought this palazzo so she would always have a home here, with us. She came every year, for a month. She watched Roberto grow up from afar, sending money, sending love, but never able to claim him as her own. It was her greatest sorrow. My father, Roberto, not the son of the stern businessman I'd known as my grandfather, but of a Venetian woodcarver. The pieces of my life were shattering and rearranging themselves into a new, startling picture. And my father, did he know? When he turned 21, Eleanor told him everything. It did not go well. He felt betrayed. He rejected her, rejected his Italian heritage. He immersed himself in the business, becoming more American than the Americans. He never spoke of it. I shook my head, tears finally spilling over. It explained so much. His distance, his anger, his obsession with the company, as if he could earn a belonging that he felt had been stolen from him. When Roberto died, Isabella continued, her own eyes glistening. It nearly destroyed Eleanor. But she had a new focus. "You," she said, "you were the only one who had Giorgio's soul." She said, "You saw the world as he did, not for its price, but for its beauty." She stood and took my hand. "Come, there is more." She led me up a flight of stairs to a large, airy workshop. The walls were lined with tools, and the air was thick with the smell of cedar and lemon oil. In the center of the room was a workbench, and on it, covered by a cloth, was a large object. "Giorgio's workshop," she said. "He was a master intagliatore, a carver. This is what Eleanor left for you. Not the ticket, not the palazzo, this." She pulled away the cloth. Beneath it was the most exquisite piece of furniture I had ever seen. A studiolo, a writing cabinet, in the style of the Italian Renaissance. It was made of walnut, inlaid with lighter wood's maple box, wood creating intricate scenes of Venetian life. Gondolas, lions, musical instruments. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Every surface alive with story and skill. "Giorgio spent 10 years of his life building this," Isabella whispered. "It was his masterpiece. He called it Eredita Legacy. He always said it was for his grandchild. Eleanor knew it belonged to you." I reached out, my fingers trembling, and traced the carved mane of a lion. I could feel the hours, the love, the soul that had gone into it. This was what she meant. This was the truth beneath the varnish. "There is a letter," Giovanni said from the doorway. He handed me a sealed envelope from Eleanor. With shaking hands, I opened it. "My dearest B, greater than asterisk, if you are reading this, you were brave. You trusted the whisper of an old woman and a flimsy ticket over the shouts of the sensible world. I am so proud. Greater than by now, Isabella has told you everything. The truth I hid for a lifetime. I gave Charlotte and Julian the shiny, hollow things they craved, a company built on image, properties mortgaged to their gables, a car collection leased for show. They got exactly what they deserved. The appearance of wealth, greater than, but you, my dear, brave B, you always saw through the veneer. You inherited your grandfather's hands, his eyes, his soul. This palazzo, this workshop, Giorgio's masterpiece. This is your real inheritance, not because of its monetary value, though the studiolo is insured for $2 million, but because it is real. It is built on love and truth and craft. Greater than. The family business is failing. It has been for years. I propped it up with loans, knowing it would collapse without me. Charlotte will call you soon, desperate for a bailout. Be kinder to her than she was to you. That is the legacy I want you to carry forward. Greater than. You are not just a librarian, Beatrice, you are a restorer. Now, restore your own life. Greater than. With all my love. Greater than grandmother asterisk. I spent a month in Venice. I learned about my Zia Isabella, a formidable woman who had run a small, prestigious art restoration school from the palazzo. I learned about my father, the man he might have been. I walked the streets Giorgio walked. I breathed the air he breathed. I began, tentatively, to work in his workshop, learning the feel of the tools he had held. The call from Charlotte came exactly 5 weeks later. I was back in my library, reshelving books, when my phone rang. It's Charlotte. Her voice was stripped of all its usual arrogance, thin and frayed. The company, it's gone. The debts, we've lost everything. The penthouse, the cars, it was all a lie. I know. Charlotte, a sob escaped her. She hated us. No, I said softly, looking out at my magnolia tree, which suddenly seemed connected to the jasmine in a Venetian courtyard. She just knew you, and she knew me. I made Charlotte an offer, shut down the corporate shell of Vintage Rose. In its place, we would start a new, smaller firm, Eleanor and Giorgio, artisanal restoration. She could run the business side, using her skills for something real. She would have a salary, not an empire. She accepted. Julian, humbled, now manages the logistics of shipping and preserving the fine furniture we work with. He's better with spreadsheets than he ever was with people, and me. Asterisk. I took early retirement from the library. The quiet world of books had been my sanctuary for so long. But now a new chapter was demanding to be written, not in ink, but in wood and history. I sold my bungalow with its familiar magnolia tree, a bittersweet farewell to the life I had known. I moved to Venice, to the Palazzo dei Sospi. The Studiolo Erudita now sits in its rightful place in the Grand Salon, a daily reminder of where I come from and who I am. Under Isabella's patient guidance, and with the help of Giorgio's old tools, I am dedicating my days to the craft, to restoring not just furniture, but the legacy that was always meant to be mine. Asterisk. The last letter Eleanor ever sent me sits framed on my desk. The final line reads, Asterisk. The most beautiful creations are not bought. They are built, layer by layer, with patience, love, and truth. Asterisk. Every morning, I look at it, and I know. My cousins were given a gilded cage. I was given the key to the whole, wide, beautiful sky. Sometimes the greatest journey begins with a single, small envelope. If this story resonated with you, please share a time in the comments when a small, unexpected gift, whether an object, an opportunity, or a piece of truth changed the entire course of your life.